Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar, Publishing Reports Online. My name is Kiernan McGordy and I'm a Principal Program Evaluator at the North Carolina Program Evaluation Division. I will be moderating our webinar today. I'd like to thank the National Legislative Program Evaluation Society and the National Conference of State Legislatures for sponsoring this webinar. NLPES is the NCSL Staff Association for legislative staff involved in program evaluation or performance auditing. One of its key purposes is promoting professional development opportunities like this webinar for legislative staff. I serve as the chair of the NLPES Professional Development Subcommittee, so I'm particularly pleased that we could bring this program to you today. This webinar is being recorded and will be archived on the NCSL website within a week. Over the next 60 minutes, we encourage participation through our chat box, so feel free to type your questions and answer any questions in the chat box, which is in the lower left hand of your screen. To build some comfort with the chat function and to also learn who is on the line today, I invite you to type in the state from which you are calling now, and if there's more than one of you in the room, please put how many so we have an idea of attendance. I also want to mention the resources for the webinar. Above the presentation, you will see a couple of tabs. One is labeled Resources. Here you can find and download a PDF version of the PowerPoint as well as other handouts. Another tab is labeled Speaker, and this is where you can read short biographies for today's speakers. You can access these tabs at any time during the presentation. We will take your questions after the presentation has been given, but feel free to enter your questions in the chat box at the lower left of your screen at any time. Our speakers today are Valerie Whitener, Deputy Legislative Auditor for the Washington Joint Legislative Audit and Review Committee, and Rebecca Connolly, Research Analyst at JLARC.
Thank you, Kiernan. Hello, and thank you for joining us. We are pleased you are interested in JLARC's process to publish our reports online. I'm Valerie Whitener, and I'm joined by my colleague, Rebecca Connolly. I'm going to provide you with some background about JLARC, the important early pre-stages that prepared us to consider the move to online web-based reports. Then Rebecca will discuss the approach we use, how we transition from publishing PDF versions of reports to interactive web-based reports. JLARC is a statutory committee of the Washington State Legislature. There are 16 legislators. Our committee is bipartisan and bicameral. Membership of the committee is equally divided between members from all four caucuses. We have a staff of 24. We have 17 analysts, an excellent admin team, and management team. Our legislative auditor and staff director is Keenan Konopasky. We are required to follow generally accepted government auditing standards. And I think this is important to remember in the context of this presentation because DEGIS doesn't require writing long written reports. It's always important that the integrity of the work is maintained and always enhanced, but it has to be accessible. So why did we move to online reports? Well, several years ago, we went through a strategic planning process, and we focused on finding that our primary customer is the legislature. And we found that they weren't reading our reports. They were aware of them, they read parts of them, but their engagement with them wasn't what we'd hoped. Our legislature is a part-time citizen legislature, and they really were interested in finding out what's the bottom line of our work and how do they take action. We worked with them and they told us this is what they wanted to know. So I'll just review what our original process was, and this may look familiar to many of you. We would do our field work. Analysts would create various work papers. Then for preparing a report, they would put together an outline. We had various stages of peer, editor, and management review of drafts, and this was a lengthy process. The report would go out to the agency that was under review or audit to provide us with a technical review. And then again, throughout our process, there's different specific quality control steps that we go through, which I won't go into today. And the result was a published report, and it was a lengthy published report. So we realized that that was not very accessible to our members. We realized despite the lengthy published report having sidebars and graphs and that sort of thing, people were still not reading the reports. And those lengthy reports were probably anywhere from 20 to 75 or 80 pages sometimes. So we really wanted to focus on getting our reports shorter. So what did we do? The main processes that changed were that we went from field work and developing work papers for analysts to start to prepare what we call bridging documents. And these documents provide the analysts opportunities to continue to flesh out ideas between the different work papers and pieces of analysis into forms that provide detail about what they're beginning to find to answer the audit question. Throughout the audit process, analysts create meetings with their team, supervisor, and peer editors to review the observations they are making. At the conclusion of field work, analysts meet with their supervisors and their peers and the editor to develop report messages. These identify the key takeaways from the audit work. After that, the analysts create outlines and review their work. Our initial attempt at online reports added HTML conversion steps to the process, and I'm going to turn this over to Rebecca to discuss this in detail.
Thanks, Val. So all of that happened before 2014. So we were going into 2014. Just to recap, we had this process, we had bridging documents, messages, and we had shorter reports that we were publishing in PDF, and they had a one-page summary. At that point, we decided to take the next step and publish online. And we opted to start with a pilot approach that would use in-house resources, and we made it happen in about 2 to 3 months from when we said we'd like to do this to when we published our first report. Like Val said, we didn't really try to change our existing process. We just added HTML conversion to it. And this is what it looked like. So when we talk about our drafting process, the project team was writing a draft. It would go to their peers for a cold read, back up to the project team for a new draft, down to the editor for formal edits, back up for the project team to accept and respond to those, down to management for that final review, back up, then it went out to technical review. And then we thought that what would happen next is the same thing as what would happen with the PDF, except that it would be converted in a program called Dreamweaver to a website, and we would publish the report. We thought that it would be very simple and clean like that. What we learned is that writing for the web is difficult, and it's very different from writing a Word document. And so when we were writing these documents this way and then publishing, it was coming out very different than what we had expected when we were looking at it in Word. And we wanted to see the web version at each step. So we created a custom macro that would convert from Word over to what our website looked like after each change in the process. And what that meant is a whole lot of handoffs to our admin team who could apply this custom macro to convert from Word to HTML. And here are those stars are the minimum handoffs, and in reality, we often ended up with dozens of handoffs in this process to get that published report. As you might expect, that created a few challenges. With all of the handoffs, we had some version control problems. There were some bottlenecks because only the admin team was really well versed in the ability to convert to HTML and add graphics. So when we published our reports, especially when we had meetings with 8 to 10 tax reports at a time, it created some big bottlenecks as we were all waiting for the expertise of a few people in the office. And ultimately, version control, like in any process, if you have version control issues and bottlenecks, you're going to end up with rework. But there were also problems where ultimately the technology that we were using started dictating the process and how we were going to move our reports through to the web. The code that we were using for the navigation didn't allow for the features that we needed or wanted. Like I said, we decided to use in-house resources, so that meant using a lot of open source code. And while that was a great thing, it didn't always have the expected results, or it had unanticipated consequences. And finally, we had a problem with some inconsistent looks. We hadn't hired a professional designer at that point, and so what we were doing is just trying to come up with looks that made sense to us, and as we tried different approaches, we ended up not having so much of a JLARC brand that told the reader instantly when they looked at it that this was a report that they could be familiar with and trust. So with all of that experience under our belt, we started a second attempt. And this time we said we're going to use a formal change process. And we worked much more closely with the tech experts from what we call LegTech. It's another legislative agency that provides technology support. So we worked with them, and we started by saying, I'll go through what our approach was quickly, and then we dive into this more deeply. So we need to map the process and identify our needs and wants. We need to then prioritize those needs and wants, identify some possible solutions, test those solutions, and choose which one would work, and implement. One thing to note here is that we also decided to treat this as a formal agency project. So we had assigned staff, regular meetings with management, budgets to work with, and regular check-ins. That was also important, that we raised this as an agency project. So mapping the process, I intentionally used a picture in the background here of some Post-it notes. Because what's really important if you're mapping your process of how you develop reports is that you map the real process, not its ideal state. And when we sit down at computers, we try to create something that looks pretty, and real processes don't look pretty. We involved all staff in mapping this process. We got them in rooms, we had markers and Post-it notes, and we mapped it out from various different perspectives. So we worked in small groups of about 4 to 5 people at a time so that we would get all of the different perspectives from throughout the agency about what was happening. And we tried to say, here's the real process and where are some opportunities for change. We tried to find those bottlenecks, find where we had a lot of handoffs, or find where there was unclear ownership. One of the other things we did through all of this was to group people by what they were doing within the agency. So analysts would look at it from one perspective. We had admin in a separate group. We had management in another group, so that we could make sure that everyone's opinion was being heard, that we didn't have, oh no, that's not what happens, so much as here's what is happening from my perspective. At the same time, we ran focus group discussions to start identifying the needs and the wants of our audiences and our staff. So it wasn't really possible for us to talk to all members. We spoke instead with our executive committee, and we went through existing reports with them and some of our old reports, and we asked very specific questions about what was working, what wasn't working, what was important to them in how they received our reports. And they were very frank with us about what parts of it they read and that they wanted to be able to get it online. They wanted an executive summary, but they also wanted to be able to print everything. We also met with legislative staff. When I say legislative staff, we spoke with nonpartisan staff as well as caucus staff. Again, going through the existing reports and saying, what's working here for you, what isn't working. Not surprisingly, they wanted more detail than the executive committee necessarily wanted, but more importantly, they wanted to be able to know who was writing the report so they could pick up the phone and ask us questions. They said it was less important for them to have a lot of detail in the report than to know where to go to get that detail when they needed it. It was more about getting that just-in-time information. We also met with all of our JLARC staff, again, these small focus groups of 4 to 5 people, to ask them what's working, what are your ideas. With JLARC, with staff, we took a much deeper dive into what kind of technology changes would they want? What would they want in a product that we purchased for them to be using to develop online reports? What kind of technology were they comfortable with? What kind of technology were they not comfortable with? So most of them had written reports in our existing system, and it was really important to hear what was their experience so far, what did they think we could change to make that process work better for them in the future. We also spent a lot of time talking with our IT staff about what server issues we needed to think about, what kind of security issues we needed to think about, and how to think about records retention, given that this is the web. What started out as a consultation turned out to be a real partnership as this process moved along. And one of the things we learned was make IT staff your partners right from the get-go, because their perspective and information is simply invaluable. A case in point, as we were going through our initial searches, we're analysts, we go out and see what's available, and we were looking at different products, and there were a few that we got very excited about until they gently informed us that those could not work on the servers hosted internally, and that we would have to go with third-party hosting, and it wasn't something they could support. That changed a lot of our opinions about those products. So what you really want to make sure is that they're brought in early on. So that all took us to a requirements document. And if you do nothing else from what I'm going to talk about today, do a requirements document. It really helps you think through what it is that you need or you want. There's no set format for a requirements document. In fact, we built ours by taking a look at requirement documents written by others and taking what we liked from those. It's probably a compilation of about 10 different requirements documents that we found. The total document ended up being between about 11 and 15 pages. That's how we were done. And the other piece was that we did not try to guess what technology people would want to know versus design people. We determined that they would know what they needed out of the requirements document and ignore the rest. So we consciously put everything into one document. This was also where our partnership with our IT staff came in handy. We went through several drafts of this document with them where they would push back and say, what does this mean? You need to clarify this for us. And that really helped us, A, put it in language that technology people would understand, but B, really think hard about some of the things that they were asking us. And this took, I think, about 2 months to create this document and get everyone on board. So the document starts with a project scope where we specified what we were going to do and what we weren't going to do. For us specifically, that was we're looking at our reports, we're not looking at our entire website. And that worked really, really well for us. We've since updated the website, but being able to focus on one thing was very helpful. We also talked about the writing process that it would need to support, and specifically the different roles that people have in that writing process. And throughout it, we really focused on our organizational culture. You may recall when I was talking before about the process we use for editing. Edits always go back to the project team. We do everything and track changes so that we can see what has changed, and the project team has an opportunity to reflect on those changes, make sure it's consistent with all of the work they've done and how they understand the evidence, and keep going forward. We say very strongly that our reports are the work of the office as a whole, and that really can be seen in our requirements document. So other elements, we go through and we talk about the audience needs and desired interaction, and that all came from our focus groups. We talk about the authoring and editing environment, the need for version control, the need for track changes, the need to be able to see both what we're writing and how that will look on the web at the same time, and also the ability to create a technical review version. The other piece was to have low barrier technology. We needed everyone in the office to be able to use this tool, not just our technology heroes. We wanted it to be something that people could work with very quickly without a whole lot of training. Another big issue for us was the need to be able to annotate, and we had to explain this process to the technology folks, and in our requirements document of what does annotation mean. And we needed to make sure that would be, the annotated version would be on a secure site, not on the web, be able to link back to everything that was in our secure folders, and be a version that our peer reviewers could easily access. We did not want them to have to learn our new technology tool in order to look at our reports. We also needed to think about our sitemap and navigation of how the reports would flow. And then the final thing on this slide is the updates, or the lack thereof. So web pages are designed to be updated. It is a constantly changing environment. You want new information unless you have a JLARC report, in which case it goes out and it needs to stay just that way. So we had to be clear that we didn't intend to change a report that had been heard in committee or already published. Other requirements, like I said, style and design. That wasn't as important for the technology folks, but it was important for us to have that recorded. Accessibility, we wanted to be sure that whatever tool we ended up with could be compatible, had code that was compatible with screen readers. We wanted to ensure that the sites were secure, but at the same time, there were products that would have required the users to have an ID or download specific technology themselves or software. And we also wanted to ensure there was no commercial interaction. We needed to make sure that our drafts could be kept internal and not accessible until they were publicly launched. hosting. If there's a lot you want to know about hosting and security measures, we can put you in touch with our tech folks. But for us, it was a matter of making sure that whatever the hosting solution was, it was something that LegTech could support for us, and that it was secure. Maintenance and support. How would we maintain this as we move forward? It's one thing to implement online reports. It's another thing to maintain. And you want, as you're looking at things, one of the things that we ran into was that some of the software vendors had proprietary pieces of code, so that if they had gone out of business or raised prices to the point that we didn't want to continue doing business, we might not have still owned the code that made our reports work. So that was something that in our requirements we felt was very important to make sure we owned the code. And finally, your search engine optimization, in case people want to find you via Google or something else. Like I said, this took several months of internal discussion, especially the prioritization process. We used a prioritization of whether something was required or mandatory, where it had to have that requirement, important, where we would prefer it, or it's nice to have, but kind of lower priority for us. There's any number of different prioritizations you could use. So at this point, we handed off our requirements document to LegTech and our IT folks, and they used their magic powers and found some options for us. In their words, they used our requirements document based on what they knew about available products, searched the web, talked to other people in their industry. They initially came up with one list of options for us that didn't really work. And then after that, they looked at some other products that they were supporting. And that brought us to looking at some solutions and choosing one. So nothing met all of our highest priority needs and wants. There wasn't anything out there that could track changes, would be easy to use, have out-of-the-box templates, work on our servers, have the right price, and be supported by our IT staff. But at that point, there was a product called Oxygen that they were already using for the code revisers' work in publishing the RCWs. So they looked at how they could adapt that to meet our needs. And what that meant was that we were going to have to get a little bit creative and compromise and focus on the solutions that would meet most of what we needed and be something that we could use. Out of the box, Oxygen was not going to be easy to use, but it was going to be easy to train once LegTech customized it for our needs. So what we did next is we purchased licenses of Oxygen for 6 people. And we chose to have it tested with our early adopters, our late adopters, and our never adopters. So at the same time that the tech staff was testing it to make sure that it would work on the servers in the way that we wanted it to, we asked our own staff to start working with it and see if they could make it work, but more importantly, if they could break it. What would make it an absolute no-go for us? And this was a very critical step for us. There were some other products that we had tested early on before involving tech staff. And the folks who were early adopters or had some previous coding experience absolutely loved the product. Those who were in the late adopter or never adopter category, they also tested it, and they broke it in some very creative ways that the more tech-savvy folks couldn't even replicate. So it's really important to make sure that everyone is comfortable. And we spent about 6 weeks testing this product. So from there, we implemented, and since our implementation is very specific to the oxygen product, I'll just go over some things that we had to think about and that you would think about as well. First is going to be your training. How do you plan for your initial training and ongoing training? And we have focused on trying to do more just-in-time training so that we found that if someone gets training on the product 6 months before they have to use it to write their report, they're not going to remember all those details. So we try to do it closer to when they're going to use it. And after a few reports, people remember most of what they need to do. We also had to think about the rollout and the timing and make sure that it works. We chose not to roll out the new tool when we had multiple reports due. Instead, we started it with one report. Hire a designer. Not only will it look better, but they're able to talk to the people doing the coding part to make sure that that look gets easily integrated into any templates you have, and that really reduces the burden on staff going forward. Think about if you need printed versions and how you're going to do that. That should be in your requirements document as well, but this is a good time to make sure that you are thinking about it again. What templates are you going to give to staff, and how much flexibility will they have with that new designer look you have, but also to meet their own needs as reports change. You want to think about how your reports are going to integrate with your overall website. And roles and responsibilities. This is not only for implementation, but also moving forward. We had to plan a handoff because I was very involved in all of this, but I'm an analyst, so I needed to go back and focus on studies. At the end of this, we had, I've been working very closely with our admin team and the IT staff, and at the end, anything I was doing was just rolled over to them, and they clarified which parts everyone would be responsible for moving forward, wrote up formal roles, responsibilities, documents, and made sure that we could have a seamless transition over to our admin staff, who have maintained it absolutely beautifully and continually added new features as we've gone forward. So this is how it works now. The technology supports our process. Here's our process. You'll see it looks very similar to what Val was talking about earlier on. We have the same process for drafting our reports. But what we focused on is software that allows us to look simultaneously at editing and web preview. It tracks our changes, and we don't have version control issues as much as we used to have. We don't hand off to admin until just before the publication, which means the project team has that clear responsibility for tracking the versions, knowing where it's at in the process, and keeping things going. So this is really about making sure that the technology supports our process and doesn't drive it. So I'm sure we're all thinking about annotation and peer review. What we have done there is we still have all of our work papers and bridging documents. Our report is written in HTML, but we have added a feature to the software that converts the report to Word. And literally it is an easy button. You press the button and it happens. Once that Word version is created, we can, the project team can create direct hyperlinks to the evidence in our working papers and bridging documents, and peer reviewers simply have to look at this Word version and all of those links when they're looking at it. So in conclusion, first question to ask is, are you ready for web reports? Be clear about your primary audience's needs and wants. Seek feedback from other members, from your staff, and also from the agencies that you audit. And if you are going to move forward, be sure that you map your process, the real one, not how you'd like it to be. Identify the requirements that you will have and include your IT experts as real partners. And remember that change is an ongoing cycle. Like I said, our admin team has continued to add great new features, and we've changed things over time, and we will continue to change. It's the web, and we will probably never finish. So if you'd like to see our reports, they're on our website. Here's a link, and we invite you to follow us on Twitter. Here's our contact information if you would like to get in touch with us. And now I believe we're ready for the Q&A part.
All right, Valerie and Rebecca, thank you for your excellent presentations. We will now move to our question and answer period. We want to stay on that slide. If you haven't done so already, please type your questions in the chat box at the lower left of your screen, and I will ask our panelists to address as many of the questions as possible. Okay, so the first question is, what impact has publishing online reports had on the office's budget?
I would say it's been negligible. We had to buy the, I can get that information to you if you want to email me separately, but in terms of the cost of the software, but also there's just been a different shift of costs from printing out paper and mailing. We handle our distribution now electronically, and that's just a different type of time. But I'd have to look at the specific amounts for the software, but we didn't have to get a special budget line item in order to do this.
Okay. The next question is, how have legislators received the change in how you publish your reports?
I would say it's been extremely favorable. I've noticed when our staff presents their reports at hearings, the members are very engaged and ask really, really good questions, and I think it's because they are accessing the information. We also track, how many hits we get on reports and so on. We review that routinely through our analytics. We've followed up with them post-release and gotten some more feedback from them, and we need to do that again. But it's been very favorable. Sometimes we've had members ask for maybe even more detail that's not in the online report. And so in that case, we can direct them to the bridging documents and have conversations with them, and that works real well too.
One of the comments we heard in the focus group too, when we first started doing the online reports, was that the members appreciated that having it online made it possible for them to quickly read an executive summary and then know that there was more there that they could go back and access any time. They didn't have to think about where did I put that printed copy, or they could get it, a lot of the information when they needed it during session, and then if they wanted to read the rest of it during the interim, they knew where to find it very quickly.
And it meant most of the members really commented that they wanted to be able to access aspects of it on their cell phones. And so it was really important that this render properly on cell phones and tablets. I would say that before when it was a PDF version, that's when they were shorter. We did a one-page summary, but it was still PDF, and you couldn't read that on a cell phone.
Okay. I was just wondering, when you were mentioning legislators and bridging documents, how clean are your bridging documents? We treat them here as something behind the scenes, and I would be a little hesitant to hand them out.
I would say they're very clean, and if certainly they're in our state, after a report is published, everything is public, and so they're clean. They're not a report. They're not written. They're thematic, typically by audit objectives, and sourced back to individual work papers, but they're not written as an audit report.
Okay. Another question is, did you do your own focus groups, or did you hire a consultant for that?
We did our own focus groups, and we, I'm trying to remember exactly how we did it, but we had a standard list of questions, and at least for the staff, they were very informal focus groups, and a lot of them just turned into discussions that the web team observed and took notes on as the staff just talked about the questions that we raised.
The next one is about, does JLARC have its own IT staff? It sounded like your legislature has IT staff. Do you all have additional IT staff?
Our admin team is very, very savvy, I have to say. They have excellent skills. But the legislature does have LegTech, which provides technical support to the entire legislature. And that's where the key programmers are, and they run all the networks for the legislature. So those were the ones that helped us with the initial real technical analysis for this. And then we have a couple real power users in our admin team that help us keep it refreshed and up to date and integrate like new aspects of software that we're using now in our reports. We also use Tableau, which is a software that can show mapping information. You can map information and show information in all different types of scorecards and so on. And so they're able to learn how to integrate those new types of products into the Oxygen format.
The next question I have is from Pat. Hi, Pat. Has online publication changed your report release process?
Yes, because we don't have to spend a lot of time photocopying and stuffing envelopes and having someone take things down to a mailroom or something. We can time the report release very effectively. We can get it to our members in advance, and then we can, because before we send it out, we put it on a test location, and it isn't accessible to anyone until we provide the location of the report to them. So yes, it has changed it. It took a little bit of time to get used to, but now I think it's far more streamlined.
I was curious in terms of, I could see how what you're putting out on the web is shorter, and therefore maybe that part could be faster, but then on the back side, I already asked about cleaning up the bridging documents, but also, did you have anybody in your office where they liked to doc cite, well, that's what we call it, doc citing while they were writing, and therefore it was a little challenging when they had to hit the publish button to the Word document and then go back and link everything?
That was one of the problems we ran into with the first process that we tried, is that there were people who were doing their annotations or their their citations as they were writing the report. That was more common with the tax reports that followed a standard format. That was less common with the reports, the more general reports that have more of a varied style to them. As we've moved forward, I think it's just been a matter of folks adapting to the change, and really having those bridging documents does make the annotation easier, because you've already cited to your work papers in the bridging documents. So if you're taking your report back to a bridging document, the link to the evidence should already be there anyway.
And one of the questions was about the bridging documents. Are they available online, or do folks just need to request those?
Someone could request them, but those are not available online. Those are documents that we use to help us maybe you have 10 different work papers. What's the common theme there? How does that relate to your audit objective? And those all live on our secure servers.
But they are considered public documents.
After the report is published, they are public documents and someone could request them.
Okay.
Doesn't happen very often.
Right. And then someone was curious if you'd be willing to share your requirements document with the audience.
Yes, that would be fine.
We can do that.
Okay, maybe we could add that as a resource to go along with this PowerPoint, because I was curious myself about getting it. Another question was about your previous reports being pretty long, and now what would you say the length of your reports is, and how is writing for the web different than writing for a tangible report or a printable report?
I think if you printed the web version of our report, most of them come out to 12 to 15 pages, depending on the size of the graphics. We haven't done a lot of work to scale the graphics to print nicely, or they print well enough. In terms of writing for the web, there's actually a lot of really interesting research out there that we looked at when we first started, that we continue to look at. But people tend to scan web pages versus reading web pages. So the use of bullet points and active headers gets to be even more important. And there's really also some very interesting studies that do eye mapping, and the pattern with which people look at a screen and where their eyes go is different than how they look at a page. So on a screen, it's an F shape, and on a page, it's a Z. So you need to take those things into account, that people are going to go in a more linear fashion. And of course, as people are using more and more tablets and phones, the wisdom a few years ago was, oh, you want things in separate sections. Now there's long pages that scroll are a little bit more acceptable. So it really is about shorter sentences, a lot more bullet points, making things skimmable.
And
okay.
I would also add that I know for me as a coordinator of audits, which is like audit supervision, it was interesting. It was a lot easier when we moved to the new product to do that work, because we each have two computer screens, so I can see what it looks like on the web and read it in that format. Because if I read it just in a regular Word-like looking format, my inclination would be to add, conjunctions and add common elements that you would think for a long written product. It isn't necessary, and it's so much better now that I can look at both versions in front of me and see, oh, this is what it's really going to look like and communicate to legislators, agencies, and the public when they read it, and to not put too many words in there.
The other piece that we have to keep in mind is that on the web, and at least with the way our reports are structured, people are less inclined to read from start to finish the way we might think of things in a very logical progression. That doesn't mean that they're not just going to go straight to tab 3 or section 3. And while that can happen with a printed report, people do seem a little less likely to open up to the middle of a report and start reading, whereas with a web report, it's easier to navigate, and they will go right to what they are most interested in. So those great transitional paragraphs and sentences have now turned into links.
All right. The next question is from Catherine, who was our did a webinar. She was one of our webinar speakers on data visualization. So I want to give a shout out if anyone wants to go back to the NLPES website and see that great webinar. But her question is, what tips do you have for shortening the length of reports?
I would say for audit teams to routinely think about the observations that they have during the course of their work, to be really clear when they get to as they're going through their analysis on what those are, and having those conversations with one another and their colleagues about that. And then the part of our writing process that involves messaging is just incredibly useful because it really provides an avenue for the teams to focus on what are the key messages that they need to talk about in their report, and to really focus on those and present those, not everything else that they did. And I think that's the most important thing, is knowing who your audience is, messaging for that audience, and leaving the other things that you need for understanding your analysis and communicating perhaps to a peer reviewer or an agency person, leaving that in your bridging document or whatever other thing you want to call it.
I mean, if we think back to one of Belle's early slides, it was, what's the bottom line and what action do I need to take? And what we found is the audience really just wants to know those key messages. What did you find? What do I need to do about it? And to provide enough evidence to support that message. But just yesterday I was working on writing a report, and I wrote this beautiful prose and then got to the point, looked at the message and thought, none of that needs to be understood to understand the message. So I got beautiful prose.
All right. Like me, Fred wants to know more about Oxygen. His specific question is, can it create interactive charts and tables? And if you guys should just take a few minutes to tell us what you think of Oxygen, and how it sounded like Leg Tech was already using it, but is it something that's available to any of us?
So Oxygen is a software product sold somewhere out of Europe, I think. It is, technically it's an XML editor, but we are using it for creating HTML based web pages. They were already using it over in the code revisor's office for being able to track changes that are happening in the RCWs, the Revised Code of Washington. So what LegTech had to do is go into the Oxygen interface and customize it so that it would work the way we needed to do it. And if someone's interested in understanding that, the best thing is to identify a technology person that you have, and we'll put them in touch with LegTech folks because they can speak the same language. Personally, I think it's a great tool. It has the ability to write in what's called a WYSIWYG editor. What you see is what you get. So folks can do that. It has the template. LegTech has created it so that we open up the template and we can just start typing. And it works very well that way. You can get into the code if you want to do that, but I don't think most of the analysts do. To insert graphics, you need to create it in another program, save it in a graphic format, and put it into Oxygen. It can create sortable tables, but otherwise any sort of interactive graphic has to be created in a program designed to create interactive graphics like a Tableau or some of the others that are out there. So you would create your graphic in an appropriate program, and then you would just put the code into the code part of Oxygen so that it knows where to go get that graphic. Does that help?
Yeah, I think that basically it's have your tech people call our tech people. I just have one last question. How are the never adopters feeling these days?
You know, I haven't heard any complaints lately. So I think it's really become part of our organizational culture of this is how we write our reports. And a lot of that is kudos to LegTech for customizing Oxygen so that it was easier to adopt, and our admin team for creating an intranet page with frequently asked questions and training tools and being there to assist at the drop of a hat. And really, you know, when people say, gee, I wish it did such and such, you know, we wanted to be able to put call-out boxes in, or we wanted a different format of a table, and they are making those things happen really quickly. So people are seeing, yes, it was a challenge to adopt, but the benefits of doing it outweigh the any potential negatives for the learning curve.
Okay. Well, again, thank you to our panelists, and thanks to all of you out there for joining us today. This webinar has been recorded and will be made available on the NCSL website in the next few weeks. This webinar is now concluded.